Hey everyone. Well, you know what? I have followed my guest today since he released his debut album, Stay, and now he's releasing his 14th album called Deeper Waters. And I am super pleased to welcome Jeremy Camp to Kingdom Builder TV. Jeremy, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Happy to be hanging out with you, bro.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to have you here. You know, Jeremy, you've been doing this for a little while now, and I've been along for that ride since you released that debut record. And when I got the press release for the new record, Deeper Waters, I was like, wow, 14 albums already. I mean, how
Yeah.
are we at album number 14? Does that seem real to you?
No, I think, you know, a couple of those are like one's a Christmas album and one was, you know what I mean, kind of a unplugged album. It's really kind of, I guess you could say it's my 12th studio album. You know what I mean? But honestly, I think for me, I don't want to do albums unless I feel inspired, unless I feel like God is teaching me something and I have something to say. And I think sometimes after I finish a record, I'm like, man, I don't know when the next time I can do a record is because I feel like I gave everything and I don't know what else I could give or even creatively try to figure out. And God is really a deep well. Like you can never get to the bottom of how deep he is. And I think that's really kind of the concept of this record anyway, is just going deeper and deeper. And so he keeps giving me these songs. And for me, I feel like this album is reminiscent of my Stay album, where that was like 20 years, 20, I guess it was probably the first 24 years of my life. I wrote this album. I was 24 when I put it out, probably 23 when I wrote it. And it was kind of a conglomeration of the first, years of my life. And then this album, I feel like it's the next 22 years of my life and all the things that God has taught me and, the ups and downs and, but really just got me to the place where it's like, I just want to go deeper with him. Like the older I get, the more I realize my need for him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so this album to me is it's not just like, well, here's another album. There's 12 of them. It's like this is special. Like God did some deep work in my own heart during this record. So
Yeah, and 14 records in, a movie about the big song I Still Believe, countless tours, and I would say that you've probably done it all since you've been in the industry. And one thing that I've enjoyed is, like I mentioned, I've been along since I started my journey in the Christian music industry after Stay come out, but my first real album that kind of was one of the first I promoted doing Christian music review back in the day was the Restored album, and that tour that followed with Adam Watts and Building 429. That was the first big tour that I had attended, and that was we're going back to 2004. And when I first launched that first website, I thought it was funny because about a year after that, I found out that I launched that website on the day that your oldest child was born, September 25th, 2004. So it's like we're going way back there. And now we're on the 14th release in this new record called Deeper Waters. And, I know every album begins with a concept or idea.
yeah,
So, take us behind, how you created this new record.
yeah. I think a lot of like I kind of walked into this whole thing in a place of just wanting to surrender. I had stuff with my health going on. We had some really difficult, like a relationship thing with some really close people in our life that ended in like they had addiction issues, and we were trying to, me and my wife were trying to walk through, and it wasn't good, and it kind of has left estrangement, and that's been really difficult too. And there's relational hardships, there was health stuff going on, and I think I just was like, God, I have to lay it down at your feet. Like I have to just surrender this. And so really the whole concept of this record came from um, the act of surrender. And surrender is not like a passive thing. It's an active thing. Like for me, I'm like, I lay down all this junk, I surrender everything, and I come towards you. And coming towards you is my desire to go deeper with him. And I think that, getting to know him more, understanding the depth of who he is more. And, it's like I want to always be in this state of growing. I think that, I said it earlier, the older I get, the more I realize I need Jesus. I want to be in a state of growing constantly. And so, you know, I want to go in those deeper waters. I want to constantly be learning and growing. And I think when you get to the place where you feel like, oh, I'm good, I've arrived, I think that you're in trouble, because we all need to grow. We all need to be teachable constantly. So I think it came from really the concept of surrender.
Right. And, this record is a follow-up to your 2021 record, Speak to Me. And I know that record was, I had actually interviewed you up at Hillfest up in New Hampshire for that record. And that was coming out of COVID, being kind of locked in and stuff. With this record, you're obviously a little bit out, but, you did have, you mentioned you had like kind of a health scare. And when I was reading about this, I'm like, wow. Because, I always joke with you because, every time I've met you, you're a buff dude. You're into exercise and stuff like that. And I always do like the muscle thing with you, which
Yes.
is pretty funny because I have absolutely no, arm muscles or guns or anything. But this health scare was something really serious for you guys. Tell us
Yeah.
about this. Tell us about that story and your recovery, from that.
Yeah. I think I've always, to kind of go back a little bit, I've always battled with trust. I think when I lost my wife to cancer, it's a thing that the enemy tries to just mess with my head. Can you really trust the Lord? Can you really? And so I think that, every once in a while I get to the point where I try to control situations to make sure that bad things don't happen, which really is an illusion of control because you can't control those situations. God is in control. And so I think that one of the things I always felt like, in the midst of all the stuff going on is that I'm going to be healthy. Like that's one thing that I can control a little bit. And, 3 years ago, I started having these heart kind of rhythmic things that were really crazy. And so, I went in, they're like, well, you have this thing called atrial flutter or supraventricular tachycardia, which is your heart goes really fast and beats irregular. And so I ended up having surgery last year. And, it was hard going through all that, but I was like, okay, I think we're good. But during surgery, they're like, hey, I think you might have AFib because during surgery, you went into AFib. And I
Hmm.
was like, okay. So like, but let's just kind of look and maybe you're fine, but let's just kind of be aware of that. So as time went on, I started having a few episodes here and there where my heart would beat at like 220 beats per minute for a half an hour. And I'm like, I just thought maybe the surgery didn't work. So of the atrial flutter. So finally it started happening a lot. So I take, my Apple Watch has a thing called the ECG. You can take your, electrocardiogram. So I do this whole thing, sent to my doctor, and they're like, where are you at right now? I was like, I'm flying to a concert. And they're like, how do you feel? I'm like, well, I feel okay now. I said, but I had this crazy episode. I had two of them last night. And they're like, you need to get to the hospital or call the emergency room if that happens again. So I'm like, wait, what? And like, yeah, this is AFib this time. This is actual more serious. AFib, because the heart beats weird and irregular, it's your risk for a stroke or a heart attack, And so I'm like, oh my goodness. So anyway, so we had to go on for 4 weeks before my surgery, and I had some concerts, had some things I had to do, and that was really rough because it was just on edge, like just wondering if that was going to happen again. And the night before my surgery, two nights before my surgery, I was doing a concert in San Diego, and my heart full blown during the show went into AFib, and we had a medical team, right away take care of me, and it was good, but it was hard. And I went and got surgery, and the surgery at first didn't do well. I had this inflammation in my heart. It irritated it. And so I was having major AFib issues after the surgery. So I went on tour having all this stuff going on. And it was tough. Like I was like, Lord, what do you want me to do? Do I just cancel the tour? And I just felt like for some reason I needed to keep going. And it ended up being I'm fine now. Things actually, my heart's healing, and I'm actually feel like I'm fine now, which I'm so thankful for. I mean, you still have to be careful and watch, but it was the hardest tour I've ever done because every night I was literally desperately going, Jesus, I need your help every step of the way because I don't know what's going to happen tonight. And I would watch him come through every night. I would see just God move in really powerful ways, and I'd see him give me strength when I felt like I had nothing because I was so weak the whole tour. But he would just breathe his strength on me. And so it really did build my faith a lot getting through this tour and getting through this surgery. of going, yeah, God has my life in his hands and he's going to guide and direct me. And so, here we are now getting ready to release this record from, a place of that, of just going, God, I have to surrender it all because there's so much going on. And I'm just ready to get it out to the world because I feel like there's so many songs that God put that were so rich and so deep. So
Amen. And looking at the record, I love the I love the artwork for this new record. You're standing there and you've got a parachute behind you. Is there any cool story behind this cover for this new album?
yeah, I think the whole concept really is like a parachute is kind of like the rescue, that it's almost like this freedom. You're floating through the air, then you hit the parachute and you're just floating, free falling. But what happened in the picture was like you have this beautiful picture of freedom, but for some reason, as I'm walking on the ground, I still have this parachute. I haven't completely let go. And if you watch the video of these days, you actually can see at one part of the video where I just throw it off. Like it's being tugged behind me and I'm like, kind of working to walk. And at one point it's like, no, like I believe that you and I are in the right place at the right time. God called us by name, like this whole release. And I think it's the whole, once again, act of surrender. That was kind of like the concept of this.
Yeah, going back to your record Stay, that's still one of my favorite records. That one and Restored are like two of my favorite records that you've done. Obviously the records that have come between, all amazing records, but going back to that first record, you had some real rockers on there. And I think one of your heaviest songs that you ever done was a song Take My Life. And there's a new song on this record, Deeper Waters, it's called No Survivors. And I actually got a chance to see you perform this song live on the theater tour. And the theater tour was amazing, Jeremy. I mean, it was
Thank
so
you.
cool. I got to take my wife. It was the first time she had seen you. It was the last date of that theater tour. Um,
Special.
yeah, so this was one of the first, songs that I had heard from the record, No Survivors, and this may be kind of a tough question. I'm sure that it's almost like people asking you who your favorite kid is.
Because I think that you're right. A lot of people, and not, I didn't write it because I was like, people want to hear me do a rock song. I wrote it because that's just what came out, and that's what I think for me, I've always just written what came out. I didn't try to like, I need to put this type of song out. And so so a lot of it, you didn't hear a lot of, I mean, Dead Man Walking was a little more rocking for sure. So you have that, so that came out, but it wasn't like all of a sudden I need to find these rock songs. It just was, it needed to be that style from what I wanted to say, no, like my ego, my pride, my grip on my life, throw it all into the fire and leave no survivors. And it was just like, it just came out as like, this needs to be this aggressive, you know, active song that you're going, I want none of this in my life. I truly want to be, in that place of surrender. And that's the active part of surrender. So I
Yeah.
think No Survivors and a song called Better. Actually, there's two songs I would say I'm really, really excited. It's No Survivors and a song called Better. Better was a very much with the relationship I was talking about of just, someone close to us that was just really hard. And then my health stuff. The chorus, the verse is very, very poignant. It says, I screamed into the silence and all I've heard was doubt. I prayed to see the sunshine, but the rain kept coming out. I've wrestled with the concept that your plan was always good because half the time I feel like it doesn't go the way I think it should. And that's just a very vulnerable, like, hey, I'm going to be honest, this is how I feel right now. But then the chorus is like, if I never understand or ever see your plan, if you don't answer my questions on this side of heaven, if you don't rush to heal the hurt, my heart's still yours forever, even if it never gets better. And I think it's just going like, hey, no matter, I'm going to be honest, this is hard. Sometimes I feel like, God, okay, do you know what you're doing? But there's a point where I go, even if you don't do these things, like my heart's still going to be yours. Like I'm still going to trust you, even if that doesn't get better. I think it's just a very raw, honest song of where I've been in my life lately. And I just really pray to encourage people that it's okay to have the questions and the doubts, but like to have that place where you finally surrender and go, but I'll trust the way you work. So
Yeah. It's and in those two songs, No Survivors really had kind of the same message as Take My Life. And then you got, Better, which had a lot of the same message of I Still Believe. I mean, it's cool how your story has really culminated over the last 20 plus years to where there are so many commonalities between your first record and this new record, which is amazing. And
There
you
is.
know, in closing, when people hear Deeper Waters, what is it that what's the biggest thing that you want people to take away after listening to the record?
Yeah, I think that there is such a strength in surrender. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And in a freedom in surrender. And I think that sometimes we don't realize the weight that we're carrying. Like I had that imagery of the parachute until you let it go and you're like, oh my gosh, what was I doing? I had this weight I was carrying that God was not placing on me. I was placing on myself. It was a burden that I was placing on myself, not him. And I just pray that people would just release those burdens um, and run towards an active sense of surrender because there's freedom in that.
Thank you so
Thank
much for joining me today, and God bless you, brother. You take care, and
you.
praying God does big things with this new record.
Thank you, bro. I appreciate you, man. That's super encouraging. So appreciate you, buddy.